Welcome to the Durham District School Board's Education and Finance Committee meeting for Wednesday, July the 8th. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We did receive a regret from Trustee Templeton tonight. So I'd like to begin with the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, North America. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none. We have the agenda for tonight. Is there any discussion, amendment, or would anyone like to put a motion forward to approve the agenda as presented? Trustee Lundquist? Trustee Thatcher, okay. All those in favor? Thank you. We have one set of meeting minutes from the July 2nd, 2020 Education Finance meeting in front of us for approval. Is there any discussion, errors or omissions regarding those minutes? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented? Trustee Noble, Trustee Burns, all those in favor? Thank you. All right, we will move right along to public deputations with Tara Cully representing our Special Education Advisory Committee.
Hello, everybody. I'll just be sharing my screen in just a moment. There. Oops. There we go. All right, everyone can see? Yes, all right. Good evening, everybody. My name, as Darlene just said, I am Tara Cully. I am the Durham Down Syndrome Association rep on our Special Education Advisory Committee on SEAC. And I'm here on behalf of SEAC to give a deputation regarding the budget for our 2020-2021 school upcoming year. Thank you for the time. Our guiding principle, or as we like to call it, our mantra, we firmly believe that all students can succeed. Our function as SEAC is to provide input and oversight to board and trustees regarding special education programming and services. We believe that it is incredibly important. It is not, per the Supreme Court of Canada, a dispensable luxury. So we have an obligation to ensure that our most vulnerable students receive all of the services that they need so that they can achieve their potentials. Right. So going on to the budget, I'm recognizing that this year was a bit exceptional in terms of process and procedure. We had a few challenges in terms of timing and all sorts of things, but we really did want to at least recognize from the hard and incredible work that the staff has done with once getting the GSN numbers, that we did what we could, and we really do like to appreciate and that for the board and from the committee. So we did want to highlight a few areas, especially along some wins and then some challenges that we from SEAC all feel that we need to highlight for you this evening. The local priorities funding replaced, which was I think 2 years ago, and has been replaced with collective bargaining agreements reached during the spring. This year has been replaced by the support for student funding model. That's fantastic. That gives us a bump of approximately 29 EAs, and as well includes some additional custodial staff. This was all prior to COVID. issues and fun that ensued, shall we say. The other things, along with the impacts and repercussions of what's happened with COVID, is that there has been a large amount of change in the way that we deliver services to all students and to staff and to our administration. And so we have to recognize that that has been a challenge. This is sort of breaking new ground for everyone. However, we did want to make sure that I believe everyone is in the same belief that safety, physical safety and mental health is incredibly important to all staff, students that are here. But what we were not really clear on was there was not real additional funding to be specifically allocated to the Durham District School Board. There was 10 million in the memorandum for mental health and 15 million for technology, but we have yet to receive any information as to exactly what the Durham Board was going to be receiving from that allocation. So our concern was, how are we going to actually fund all of these additional staff, PPE, the personal protective equipment, the materials, signage for safety, keeping physical distancing? How are we going to make sure that that is actually appropriately funded so that we can all feel safe and comfortable returning to school? Technology, not just, there was an investment of 15 million for hardware and for technology, but our software licensing funding was also quite significant. We generally spend around 200,000 a year on licensing costs, and the software licensing agreements that were at provincial levels were changed. So now it's only on a per FTE basis. We're only getting $35,000 now. That is a significant drop in our software budgeting going forward. We don't foresee a change to that. So there is a shortfall that we have to make up. As well, due to the reclawing back of the fuel charges, I believe it was over $563,000, I believe, from the DDSB, recognizing that a large number of our students, especially, do need that busing. We have a large number of short buses, the smaller buses, where now physical distancing inside that transportation now becomes a lot harder. So we're going to have to transport less children. So we feel that that transportation budget is going to be even further taxed this coming year. But because that transportation is absolutely necessary for our children, we have to make sure that that is secured and is kept in place. Right. So again, with the process of this year, we had a fair number of concerns, and we really did want to bring those up to light for the board for their consideration. Again, top of the list, physical health and mental health impacts. Many of our students are more vulnerable. There have been lots of case studies that a large number of our special education children are much more susceptible to mental health issues. So how are we going to make sure that that is there? Not only our students, but our staff that are supporting all of our students. We're dealing with children that may have issues dealing with change. This is a huge change to routine. This is a huge change to the way the world works and that they're used to working, especially coming in and out of school. How are we going to support those children, and how are we going to support the staff supporting those children to make sure everyone feels safe and healthy and happy? For remote learning, we do have a number of parents that may not feel comfortable in the fall to send their children home, back into school. How are we going to ensure that remote learning is still as productive, where over the summer or over the last few months, learning hasn't necessarily been at as the most productive levels as it could have been? Some children have thrived, but others have not. How are we going to ensure that they are able to get back into the swing? As well as for remote learning services, and many of our children also access our school-based rehabilitative services, occupational therapy, speech and language, a lot of the services that are being dealt with through our Grandview Children's Centers. Access to those systems, if they're staying at home, are we now going to have to worry about bringing those children into schools in order for them to access those services, or how are we going to manage that? The third bullet, I did want to highlight this as well. With the timing of release of the GSN numbers was incredibly late this year. We all recognize that. So we understand that there was a large crunch in that. For us, what SEAC we'd like to make sure that we're stressing to the board on this case is that we didn't have a lot of time to sort of look through the budget and understand where the changes were going to be. We didn't have the time to get back to our associations and get feedback from our own associations in that time to really provide a fulsome and thoughtful response for this. So we're concerned that with all of these above stressors, talking about the new world or the new normal, how are we going to make sure that that input is able to be given to the board and to the trustees, so that you can have that better lens from a special education view from all of our agencies, not just one specific view. So we would really like to make sure that that point was stressed, that we feel that there is more work to be done, that we have more input to, and that we would like to be able to provide. Further to that, for some non-COVID items, we had to make sure that we felt that it would be remiss if we didn't actually state that we still have a few other concerns. We do really want to have that discussion and make sure that those points aren't lost. The mandatory e-learning for secondary students in one of the latest memorandums is that the process for exemption has yet to be determined, and fair number of students may decide, and parents may decide to opt out of that. And is there going to be any concerns or impacts from a resourcing standpoint if that number is larger than anticipated? We do want to make sure that that is factored in for. As well as the Ontario Autism Program, we still do not have any information from the provincial government as to what the Ontario Autism Program and, pardon me, the revisions to that and that model will be. How will that then impact our students as well? There's an influx of children who have not been in and may have never been in a school setting that are now coming into the school because the programs that they were previously in were shut down. How is that system being, and how is that influx of high needs children going to be able to be brought in, as well as still meeting needs for all of the children that are already in the system? As well as the new math curriculum, just from that perspective, what additional impacts will we have on that school year, requirements for training, supports for staff and students absorbing that new curriculum. I understand that there is a $1 million grant with the math strategy funding, I believe is what it was called. So we do know that that is there and in place for that. Has that been factored into the board's budgets for, and is that sufficient for what we feel that it will be able to successfully implement that new curriculum? All right, so recommendations, I think these probably speak for themselves. We really do encourage the board. It's been a long-standing point of order for the board that we understand and we acknowledge and absolutely thank the board for continuing to support our children with special education needs and funding them above the standard envelope that's allocated from the government to provide those necessary supports to allow them to reach their potential. Given the stressful times for everyone, we would like to make sure that that continues to happen going forward. We'd also like to request that we continue to have input and into the budget and the reopening processes, so that you do get that lens for our most vulnerable students with children that need a special help with support with transitions and change, so that you have as many fulsome and thoughtful ideas brought forth to the table. Going forward, we also need to continue to lobby the ministry. Again, the data is still funding the models using 2005-2006 census data, where we do currently have 2016 census data that could be available. We are being defunded more than 3,000 children that are not being accounted for in the funding model currently, according to the stats from the funding model. We'd also like to make sure that they do actually provide additional support of staff and students for the physical and mental health, not just a ballpark number, but what does that finally look like? And make sure that if there is any additional upheaval in an increase in requirements to keep our students and staff safe physically and mentally, that the funding is available, because that is of utmost importance for everyone. Our commitment, we do and will continue to advise and make recommendations to the board and trustees on matters affecting those programs and services of our exceptional students. And we will work with our respective organizations to lobby the government to effect positive change, as well as advocate on behalf of all of the exceptional students by providing our feedback to the Ministry of Education, our MPPs, MAXI, and EQAO on funding and policy concerns. So thank you again for listening. And I would like to again recognize all of the efforts from the boards and the trustees trying to find innovative approaches, knowing the challenges that we have with the resources and the funding that we do receive to make sure that our students are supported as best we possibly can. But it's crucial that we continue to collaborate so that we can make sure that we raise the issues about the inequities in the system so that we can ensure and perhaps improve everyone's situation going forward. We all need to take an active role to ensure our voices are heard. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Tara. It's I appreciate you taking the time to bring forward your presentation on behalf of SEAC and all the work that you do throughout the year to that SEAC does to advocate for our students with exceptional learning needs. So does anybody have any questions or comments at this time for Tara? Okay, I don't believe I see any hands. Let me just...
Yeah, actually, I do have my hand up.
Oh, good.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It wasn't showing on this side. Okay, I see you, Donna. I apologize, Trustee Edwards. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Tara, for taking the time to present. It's always great to hear from SEAC. And just a comment on the e-learning. Just a question, because you somewhat touched on it about extra supports, because around students with special needs, about not the uptake, but even if they do the uptake, have we received any comments about the additional from the associations on the additional sports that still may need to be required even if they tried to do the online credits?
But that was to me, Donna? Sorry.
Yes.
Oh, no, we haven't had a ton of discussion within SEAC on that. I do know that there has been, in specifics on that, I do know that several associations definitely have had conversations with their membership. However, we have not yet really formulated an accurate response to that. Again, it's sort of back to when you're in an online situation, if a child needs the physical face-to-face time for redirection or has trouble focusing, what does that look like if it's an online situation? The child can just get up and walk away from the class, from the computer, unless someone is actually there. So I think a lot of the concerns, at least personally, I know I would have concerns that keeping my child on task for that. Does then that mean I now have to be at home when my child is taking those classes or sitting with them for those classes? What does that really look like? And what does that do from a support? Again, back to parents can't necessarily always be there every second of the day if they're working. What does that mean for the children? So it's sort of all mishmashed together. So we know that there's concerns on that, especially with, are those courses going to be able to provide different accommodations if you need to have different plans, if children are fact-based versus and have to have assignments done and submitted differently in order to accommodate those needs. Anyone that's deaf or hard of hearing, making sure that all the equipment is there to make sure that the whatever teacher and is giving the class is able to have the appropriate volume and lip reading, all sorts of things, vision issues. The issues are varied and myriad. So it's taking that, everything that you would normally have in an in-class situation, you now have to apply it in a remote situation, plus with the additional issues of now the teacher's not actually in the class to help redirect children, not actually there to necessarily read body language, is not there to pick up on the physical cues that they could use to help children. Oh, Johnny, I noticed that you're, kind of staring off into space, or you've done that. What if someone's just gotten up to go get a glass of water? There's all of those disruptions that you can't control when you're in a physical classroom. So that's going to be a lot harder for some of our children to deal with.
And thank you for that. And again, thank you for quickly putting the budget presentation together. I know that basically it was almost like 24 hours trying to put this together. So I appreciate all the effort that you and members have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Trustee Morton has her hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I want to compliment you, Tara. You did a great job on that presentation. I really like the comments around the unknown costs of transportation and mental health. You made a comment saying that you would appreciate additional time to study the budget. You felt that you didn't have enough time to really thoroughly look at the budget. What kind of a time frame would you like to see on that?
Well, to be honest, I think some of the things that we don't know, example, as of yesterday, Carla, I think when you and Jennifer, thank you both for actually walking us through what we knew at the time, is for the two general, I'm going to call them general fundings, 10 million for mental health and 15 million for technology. But that's for that's at the provincial level. We have yet to understand what the specific allocation is for the DDSB. Is it going to be enough once we actually get that number? Or do we have to work within that number? And then if we have to work within that number, is that sufficient and to be able to handle the needs due to COVID? And now we have to also not just only handle in-class learning, remote learning, and then crossing and all of those transitions and all of the change to routine for every child and every student and every staff member as well. This is not easy for them either, trying to juggle, I've got to be in class here, but then I've also got to teach the online, and then I've got to make sure that this is done. It's very difficult what we're asking everybody to do right now. So is that money that has been earmarked going to be enough? And that's really one of the main points that's there.
So your point is we need to acknowledge that there will be many unknowns.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tara.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? I don't believe I see any at this time. So thank you again, Tara. I really appreciate you coming and continuing to advocate for our students and bringing forward the concerns on behalf of the members of SEAC and the agencies that you all represent. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the time. I do appreciate it. Thank you again. I will be available for questions if you need. Andrew knows how to get a hold of me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, Tara.
All right. So we will move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the consideration for the 2020-2021 draft budget report. With, sorry, I'm going to look, Interim Associate Director of Corporate Services, Kisco.
Thank you very much, Trustee Forbes, and good evening, trustees. The budget report for discussion this evening provides detailed information about our board's 2000-2021 revenues and our proposed expenditure plan. It's important to consider the proposed budget in the context of this COVID environment that we're all experiencing. And I really, really appreciated the comments that the SEAC presentation made about so many unknowns. And it's unknowns about how that next school year will unfold and what cost pressures will actually emerge, which is one of the reasons why it's critically important that the budget needs to be flexible in order to adjust to these changing events. Staff kept this in mind when developing the budget that is before you tonight. What we do know is what was provided in the funding announcement on June 19th. We know that the grants include additional funding for the centrally negotiated agreements with education employee groups. In particular, The grants include a 1% adjustment for employee compensation, and they also include additional funding for the increased permanent staff as negotiated by our employee groups. And that was a point that was made last night and needed to be emphasized, in that it was our employee groups that did negotiate additional staffing. And for that, we are really appreciative. These funds have been included in the proposed budget in each area, and our staff complement will increase to reflect the new positions once the hiring process is completed. Given this COVID world and the resulting emphasis on deep cleaning and mental health concerns, increasing our complement of teachers, custodians, educational assistants, and other staff is very appropriate and urgent at this time. We know that class sizes in secondary schools were negotiated to 23:1, which meant an increase for DDSB's current level of 22:1. Our secondary administrators were tasked with re-timetabling their schools late in the year, and adjustments were made. Supplementary staffing was provided to some smaller secondary schools in order to ensure that a range of programs for students at these locations could be provided. Attrition addressed the balance and prevented the need for any teacher layoffs. What we also know is that the ministry has committed to additional funding for mental health, technology, and PPE, but the specific allocations to individual school boards has yet to be announced. We also know that we need to focus our PD, our staff training, on the return of students and staff who have had varying experiences with distance learning and with that social detachment that we've all experienced since the closure of schools in March. We know that our dependence on reliable technology has now increased, and we know that the security of our IT systems and critical data is essential. We know that we needed to align our budget for WSIB, and we also need to enhance our return to work program for staff. It is these key areas of focus, PD, staff training, IT, WSIB, and enhancements to our return to work program that are emphasized in the proposed budget plan for 2021. Andrea and Georgette will provide more detail on our professional development and mental health focus in a few minutes. Now, here's what we don't know. We don't know what the expectation for PPE will be for both students and staff. This, of course, will not only depend on the instructional delivery model put in place for September, but it'll also be dependent on the direction we hear from both the ministry and our public health officials. We don't know how many requests for staff leaves we'll receive. We don't know what additional funding the ministry will provide for PPE and other COVID-related pressures. And we don't know if we'll experience an outbreak in a school or at the central department. So what do? All we can do at this point is plan with the information that we have at this point. We are planning for the return to school, and you'll hear about some models tonight in the special board meeting. We are planning for the staff return to central office. We are planning for a possibility of an outbreak in either a school or a central office or both. We have planned a budget with the information available to us today. And the budget is balanced, and the risks of the unknowns are identified. I can now, if I could, please turn to Andrea and Georgette to describe in more details the plan for addressing the well-being for staff and students that are returning to school and work.
Thank you. So the ripples of impact of a global pandemic will continue to be varied for our students, their families, and our own DDSB staff. Our students and their educators will be entering back into classrooms changed by their experiences since the school closures, and many of those impacts will continue to ripple. Prior to COVID, we planned mental health and well-being supports across 3 tiers of intervention: broad well-being strategies for all, accommodation and response for some, and collaborating in board and across the community on intensive interventions for a few. We do anticipate that as we return to learning for the 2021 school year, this pyramid of interventions will be flipped, that most will require support in coming back together into new classroom communities, that many will require that support to be individualized, and that for a few, this has been a time of great resilience and preference of conditions that will also take a change to adjustment as well. The teams across inclusive student services, human resource services for staff support,
and mental health and well-being continue to work together to plan for system learning based on trauma-informed practices. A 3-year plan launched last fall that has taken on elevated importance and rightfully compressed timelines as we expedite that process, and also compassion fatigue. This is absolutely critical, as being informed of someone's trauma and serving through compassion to that and engaging in trauma-informed practices are very different strategies within our educational setting. Through inclusive student services, we plan for the individual supports and interventions for students that require service on an individual basis. We are proud to have a team that continues to work this summer to provide for continuity of service. Our focus is aligned with the work of our well-being and mental health partners who are working to reshape the focus on well-being for all and what that will look like in classroom communities during pandemic times. I turn it over to Superintendent Davis.
Hi, thank you. And to reiterate what Superintendent McCauley stated, we anticipate that all students will need a chance to debrief, build relationships, feel a sense of belonging, calm anxiety, and re-engage in learning, as well as honor missed rituals when they return to school. And that's going to be our focus for the return to school plan. Students will need extra time to catch up on their learning and to access dedicated mental health support. And we also anticipate that there's significant needs for those who were most vulnerable or most affected by COVID-19 during these unusual times. So therefore, we will be working closely with inclusive student services. For example, our focus during distance learning around mental health and well-being were those supports, stronger together even when apart. And our focus for the fall will be transition support around mental health and well-being. We've already began to plan, and we have started to work with our modified calendar schools who will be starting school soon. So with those schools, we've been working on professional development related to resources such as 21 days of well-being. This learning will support teachers to create connections, community, and well-being within the distance learning environment in August for the modified calendar. We also will be providing professional development for our teachers of the modified calendar schools around mental health literacy. Mental health literacy focuses on strategies such as creating mentally healthy classrooms, helping students build social emotional skills, and helping students learn about mental health, and much, much more. So our staff will be then able to provide us with some immediate feedback that we will use to support all of the other teachers who will be transitioning in the fall. So our goal is to get to know our students. Our goal is that deep knowledge of each student, which is a part of our culturally relevant resources as well. And our focus is on connections, well-being, engagement, mattering, and equity. Now I will turn it back to Associate Director Kiska.
Thank you. So to finish up, I want to now turn a little bit to the area budget that really does draw a lot less attention, and that is the capital side of the budget. And that's because capital, for the most part, is very prescriptive, and it's project-based. The ministry approves every step of the way the process for new capital construction. And although there is one component, which is a growing area of concern for DDSB, and it was raised in the last couple of meetings, and that is the deficit in our EDC account. EDCs is our funding source for new school sites, and the issue is that the province now restricts how much boards can in fact increase their rates and within that bylaw period. As the value of property increases, school boards continue to fall further behind and in their ability to address the cost of land for school sites. We also know there's a lot of expectation on school sites that are imposed by not only the ministry with respect to childcare, but also with respect to the municipality for bus turning, for parent kiss and rides, as well as adequate parking requirements. So this is an area of budget that does need immediate attention. and it should be reviewed in the context of site requirements for all of those activities that school sites are expected to accommodate. Trustee Forbes, we would be pleased to answer any questions I have with me tonight. Jennifer Machen and Melissa Dewar that are prepared to take questions as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Interim Associate Director Kisco. Trustees, do you have any questions or comments on the budget at this time? I see Trustee Edwards. Go ahead.
I do want to thank staff and especially when we're looking at PD and ensuring that the teachers have training and they're prepared to move forward. And again, recognize that we are supporting special education to the tune of, what is it, 4.5 more million or something like that. But one of the things that was also brought up was the whole thing is that our education partners did negotiate through their contracts for additional staff, but that was additional staff that was seen as needed during regular times. My concern is still, we talk about mental health, and our staff did a phenomenal job ensuring that our students felt connected and so forth, but learning did, for a lot of our most vulnerable students, did fall short because of their needs not being met. So I'm just wondering, as far as I know, we have an additional staff that has been added around psychology and so forth, and EAs, but it really comes down to the assessment of those kids as they come in September, is getting a really good picture of what their needs are. And assessment has always been in high demand and always very short, and there's been a lot of times there is a huge wait list. I'm concerned about, do we have enough resources and support around that whole assessment piece to get a better feel of what our students need in order to continue on learning?
All right. Over to, looks like Superintendent Macaulay would like to take this one. Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Forbes. Trustee Edwards, thank you for your advocacy and steadfast for kids and families. I think the answer to that sits within our community partnerships as well, and how we support as a whole community, and then what is absolutely our privilege and responsibility as a board to support. And understanding our students does start with assessment. As Superintendent Davis said, it's about reconnecting with our kids and understanding where they are at that point of reentry, communication and collaboration with families to get that narrative from them in terms of their needs and perspectives on programming areas of focus. And then there are those times where we need to move to that standardized assessment. And our teams have been looking at that, even just in terms of how do we need to pre-plan protocols to adjust to the health conditions. Such as speech language. We're doing a pilot through iPads versus the tactile materials that could be a problem from a cleaning perspective. We also continue to work really, really closely with our community partners. We're meeting with Grandview on Friday morning to look at how do we all come together to support, because it's not just about the students' school day, it's about that family's experience and that youth or child's experience 24/7. And so that's where we're really privileged and really honored to be part of the network in Durham that takes a holistic look at that, and how do we all take the resources that we have available and knit them together in a way that makes sense for families and kids. But I absolutely hear you on the importance of assessment. When we redid our pathway to intervention as a redo of the IPRC to focus on programming, that early assessment and ongoing assessment in a varied level, both from our clinicians and educators, as you'll remember, is at the core of that. So I echo that. And please know that it's at the front of the mind for our clinicians and how we look towards the fall, knowing that that's a key part of our service delivery model in Durham.
Okay. Supplemental, Trustee Edwards, or? Oh, all right. So I'm going to go to Trustee Lundquist. I do see you, Trustees Brainy and Barnes, and I will get to you. Oh, sorry. Okay. Over to you, Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Chair Forbes. I have two somewhat related comments, concerns, and possibly questions. So I have raised this already, and you'll note that it was raised in the SEAC presentation as well. So I appreciate that we are building flexibility into the budget in light of the vast unknown that faces us in September and forward. But I don't actually have a sense of, not only is there funding coming to cover these things, but do we have any idea of what kind of costs we are going to be required to absorb potentially? So I understand that the costs might be offset or might be covered, but have we actually looked at the cost of increased costs of busing, of PPE, of signage, of all of the things that we know are going to be realities come fall? Yeah, because I don't see that exactly anywhere. And then, you know, I know that that is very challenging when you're talking about an increased complement of staff, which I know we have some, but I don't think it's going to be adequate in light of what I think the fall is going to look like, either initially and later. And then I'm also concerned about this mental health piece. So I'm just going to throw them both on the table, and then somebody from either finance or inclusive services might be able to speak to it, or perhaps Nora or somebody else. So what I'm concerned about on the mental health piece, beyond funding, which I'm going to remain concerned about because I fear that no matter how much funds we direct into that, it's not going to be adequate in light of the environment we're in. But specifically, what I'd like to know is we did create some programming around mental health intervention during the phase of COVID that we got through from March to June. There were programs that were put in place, but I actually haven't seen anything that suggests that we've assessed whether they were of impact. So was there evidence to suggest that the things we were doing worked? And are we just going to continue to do them without assessing whether they were working or not? That's the part that I'm a little bit unclear on, and I'm not assuming anything, I just don't have that information. And it seems to me that now's the time to really take a look at whether the strategies that were implemented make sense before re-implementing them and doing something that works or doesn't.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. I'm not sure who would like to take this, Acting Director Marsh or Superintendent McCulley or Superintendent Davis. Okay, over to you, Superintendent McCulley. Thank you.
So thank you, Trustee Lundquist, for the question. And I think, again, a very good point to go back to those we serve, to hear from them what the impacts were. The teams have certainly gone into a deep dive reflection, but you're right, we need to circle back to our families. And so I take that point to heart, and we'll take it back to the team. In terms of the teams, they've been reflecting on who we've been able to connect with, what has made a difference in terms of maintaining connections, and who we've been able to connect them to when it's outside our purview and is with one of our community partners. The team recognizes that we're going through many phases of the pandemic. We had March, and then April and May looked very different from that, and then June seemed to take on a different life separate from that. We have our July, August, and we're anticipating for the majority of our schools and families that we'll see that 2-week period. And again, the ministry has been good in supporting us with some funding to tier our staff back early to support in the ramp up to the school year. And then we're expecting the fall to go through some cycles as well. So the team is currently planning their processes and emphasis. As we mentioned, a heavy emphasis on professional learning and direct service. But I absolutely hear you on have we gone back to those we serve, both our adolescent youth and our families, and hear from them. So thank you.
If I may, I'll just add to that. We did, in our initial survey that we've just completed, we did ask both students and families about their use of the mental health materials that we made available. We didn't dig deeply into how impactful they were, though, as far as making a difference, but we do have some data, and we did invite Manager Conley to be part of the special board meeting following this meeting in anticipation in case there were further questions around that survey data. We haven't dug deeply into all of that yet. We asked a lot of questions of our families and our staff. And so primarily the first focus in was actually in preparation of the adaptive models that we are going to be discussing. And we wanted to make sure we took that feedback to inform that process. Our plan, though, later in August is to provide a digger deep dive into everything we learned as far as the quality of distance learning, what worked well, where we needed to improve. That will be part of Superintendent Milia's work as far as flex and distance learning, but also a more comprehensive. I think we asked 60 odd questions of families. So we do have a lot of data there, and we did ask specifically about the mental health strategy, but we haven't unpacked it yet.
So if I may,
go ahead.
I know I have the other question floating out there, but I just did want to say one thing about the response, which I appreciate. And I also acknowledge that there's a lot unfolding very quickly. And when I'm asking this, it's not a criticism, but it just seems to me that resilience over the short term is one thing, and resilience over the long term is something very different. And so a strategy that might have worked early on might really need to be reflected upon. And so I hope that we're building that in, that revisiting of it over the course of the pandemic, because we know that resilience depletes over time. And I think that that's going to have a significant impact on the students in the system. So I'm hopeful that as all of the brilliant minds work on these things, they remember to check back consistently, because I think it's going to be a moving target throughout the pandemic.
Thank you. All right. So did we want to answer is there any response to the other question? Okay.
So to the finance question, through you, Madam Chair, the questions around what it would cost for PPE. I mean, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, really difficult to anticipate given that we don't really know what model. But our rough estimates right now, if all staff require PPE and we require it on pretty well a regular basis, it could be upwards of around $2 million that we're spending annually. So when we hear a number like $4 million provincially, it does cause concern about the shortfall. But again, that depends on the model. It depends on the requirements with respect to, and whether or not physical distancing can be achieved through the way that people are flow through buildings, which is really what we're trying to achieve. So a lot of effort is being done, done right now. A lot of work is being done on looking at classroom setup, flow, signage to ensure that the flow is appropriate and to keep that physical distance. You asked a question about transportation. We believe we have a little flexibility in the transportation budget that was included. And we believe that, according to the modeling that's being done right now by the Transportation Department, that the budget that we have set for transportation is what they're working within and seems to be adequate at the present time. Again, it really depends on the model that's chosen. And so those are the unknowns. On the other side of it, though, given that we don't really have further information from the ministry on exactly what our allocation is, I mean, those kinds of costs become very public as we're unable to, address some of the cost pressures that are going to be emerging. And really, I think all boards are going to be in that same boat. And those numbers are going to become important for the ministry to appreciate and to understand that boards are going to be challenged with trying to absorb all these costs in budgets that are already pretty well set. Let's not forget, most of our budget is staffing, and there's very little flexibility in the other discretionary accounts. We're trying to retain as much flexibility as possible, but those additional costs really do need additional money. So we're waiting on, anxiously waiting on what those ministry funding announcements will be in future.
Supplemental?
Thank you. And I will stop talking as soon as I just respond to that. So I am sorry for asking you to speculate, because I know that that's one thing I don't like to do either. And it's hard for somebody who is numbers oriented to have to do that. And I apologize, but I just had no sense at all of what that looks like. But what that tells me, based on even that number and the numbers that the province is announcing, is that there is going to be a shortfall if we don't engage in advocacy. And so I'm hoping that the board will agree to send a letter to the government expressing concern around the various shortfalls that are directly related to COVID and the need to create an environment that is safe for staff and students. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Trustee Brainy, and then we'll go over to Trustee Barnes.
Thank you, Trustee Forbes. I'd like to first of all thank you and staff for the work that you've done with this budget. We're dealing with COVID. We've got an unprecedented year that I think we all agree that we never want to see again. But given the information that we've been given, I think we have put together a really good balanced budget that is left open to flexibility of change. I also believe that any hurdles that we may have to overcome moving forward, we will get through those together. That being said, we talk about well-being and mental health. I'm concerned right now about the well-being of trustees and staff. We've put in an exorbitant amount of hours since COVID hit, and dealt with it very admirably. But my concern is moving forward that we have so many things on our plate. I think it's imperative that we approve this budget, because I do have the faith that the challenges that we may have with it and things that may come up, we will deal with together. However, at this point in time, there is no new information coming in. I think we've put it together the best way that we possibly can, given the challenges that we've been given. So that being said, the question I would have, could we possibly move this budget this evening?
Okay. Well, I do have hands up from Trustee Barnes, who hasn't had a chance to speak yet. So I would really prefer to give Trustee Barnes a chance. And I do see Trustee Edwards has her hand up again. So I think it's imperative that we hear from anyone who wishes to speak. So I would like to continue on with discussion, if that is acceptable to the Board of Trustees.
Just a point of order, a motion always takes precedent over the agenda, so.
Was that a motion?
Maybe no, a question.
It wasn't a motion. It was a question to our director, the associates now, to Carla, that I get the impression that she feels very confident and moving forward that we've put together a good package for a budget. So is that a possibility? It's a question. It's not a motion at that point in time.
Okay, so be it. Thank you, Trustee Forbes. Chair Forbes.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, Interim Associate Director Kisco, did you want to address Trustee Brainy's comment, or?
Well, I guess it's the remark about confidence in what was put together, and I am confident with what is put together. What we've identified is the unknowns, And the extent to which we could anticipate or and build some buffer in the budgets, we've done that by maximizing flexibility within the budget and certainly in areas where we could. So I'm confident with what we put together. I'm not confident that the ministry necessarily is going to address all of the pressures that emerge. I think realistically, all boards are going to be challenged with accommodating and addressing those cost pressures, which is one of the reasons why I think every board is feeling the same way. We need to know information with respect to funding commitments, but it's not likely to come until later in the fall.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to Trustee Barnes.
Thank you, Trustee Chair Forbes. My questions got answered, so you can move on to Donna. I was just asking again about the flexibility, how flexible we'll be before we break. Was going to be my question, but I'm realizing that there's not much that we can do in speculating on the numbers, so I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Trustee Edwards.
Can you hear me? That's the biggest thing.
Yes.
Okay. And one thing I agree with Trustee Lindquist is that we do have to advocate. So even if we do move forward with this budget, I think that it would be wise for us to outline our concerns, even as far as that's concerned. I have no problem moving the budget to go to board, but I have a problem around public consultation. And it hinted around from SEAC, and that we have a responsibility as trustees to ensure that we have given true and public consultation and timing. SEAC literally got most of the information of the day, and I'm not going to get into a point of when things weren't posted. There's difficulty finding the budget and where it is in full on the website, and so and we probably won't get a lot because traditionally it's SEAC that's the most person that came, but they themselves have said that they have not been able to go back to their associations to really look at the budget and see within. And I think part of it is really around what types of reserves we have in order to put us over until maybe the government does or does not address it. But I mean, I honestly feel no problems. As I said, the numbers are what they are. I'm confident in those numbers of what we're doing with them. I just feel really uncomfortable of the lack of public consultation at the time. And I recognize it's not staff's fault. They've done the best that they can, but we normally have where the finance committee recommends the budget to the board, and then we end up from that point in time, that's usually the 1 week, the following week the board is, and then we have, sometimes it's a Thursday, so it's not quite a full week, but we give public consultation time. And our budget is not due into the ministry until August. I just feel that 1 extra week, and I recognize that meeting will end up being fairly short because there probably won't be anybody there with comments because during the time it's summer, but I still feel very uncomfortable not following process and not giving adequate time for public consultation.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Edwards. I do see Trustee Crawford's hand up. Over to you, Trustee Crawford.
Thank you. There was just one specific question. How much money do we have in our reserves, and is it limited as to where we can use it? Someone can answer that. And I wanted to speak to what about the budget being passed. I see nothing wrong with setting a day next week to pass it. That would give lots of time for anybody who wanted to say something about budget that they could. And besides, I think it's going to be a flexible budget anyway, even if we passed it tonight. something could happen tomorrow or within the next week where we'll have to open it up and redo it. That's the times that we're in. And maybe an answer to what we have in reserves.
Over to you.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Basically, we have $14.4 million in our working fund reserve. One of the things I just want to caution trustees with tapping that reserve for PPE related or COVID related expenditures is those are reserves that really can be put back into programming with ministry approval, of course. And these are funds that, you know, take a long time, just like a savings account. It takes an awfully long time to gather up reserves. And I think that using your reserves to address the pressures, again, I would not be encouraging that if I could advise that the pressure needs to, or the funding needs to come from the provincial source and not through program monies that could be used to support additional student programming. Just comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Trustee Barrett.
Thank you, Chair Forbes. I just want to actually build on what you've said. There's no way that we're gonna, and I would agree with you, that I would be supportive of using reserves to be able to fulfill a responsibility the provincial government should have. This is about reserves that if we have to use it, we'll use it for spec ed as we have, and we continually do. It's about putting faces on children, not putting about masks on faces. We're not going to do that. I can't speak for we, but I'm certainly not supportive of that because the government, to Trustee Lundquist's point, Trustee Edwards, they have to, there's a responsibility to make sure that we protect our students and staff, and certainly not going to use the reserves. As we use it for spec ed, that's another story. And being able to deal with mental health issues, that's another story. But for PPE equipment that the government should be able to come up with, I just think, I agree with you. That's just ludicrous. The government has to live up to its responsibilities. So that's my soapbox. That's enough.
I see Acting Director Marsh's hand is up, so go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Forbes. I did want to ask a question of clarification just to make sure that staff are clear, depending on how this meeting ends. In terms of Trustee Edwards' concern around public consultation and public awareness, which I can totally appreciate, we did advertise this evening as the meeting for them to come forward. And so I just want to clarify that in the dates that we published through our media release and in other locations, we identified that tonight was that night, and then it's possibly past this evening or next week. So I just want to clarify expectations based on Trustee Edwards' comments. Would it be that people could potentially submit in written form between now and then? Because otherwise we're turning next week's special board meeting into something different than what is on the schedule that has been published. So just a process question from staff. Should we decide to go down that road, we would need to clarify that, please.
Okay. And I think that's a reasonable question. And I do agree with Trustee Edwards about public consultation. It's absolutely necessary. And this would be at the will of the board, would we want to entertain, given the compressed time frame of the information being released and the timing of this meeting, where to invite public consultation or deputations, would we invite written deputations to the Board of Trustees between now and next Monday, so that we have time to read them, and then we could incorporate them into our deliberation next week on the 15th. I'll just open that up to I do see Trustee Morton has her hand up. Go ahead, Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you. I am very much in support of providing additional time for the public to respond to us. But I also have a question for Associate Director Kisco. Could you identify for me the exact date that the province has given to us as for providing them with our balanced budget? Is it July the 31st?
No, it is August, and I'm looking, hoping that Jen can pull it up. I want to say the 15th or something like that. August 15th, I think.
So we do have time to contemplate some changes if need be.
Oh, there is time. The only issue, I guess, the only changes would be if additional money came along, and there's no, I don't think there's a possibility for that between now and then.
But maybe we could use some of that time to advocate for our staff and our students, province.
Yeah. I think that's
Thank you.
a possibility.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm in a bit of a, this is a bit of a new territory for me. So I guess I would look for direction if we would like to, do we need a motion to change the communication that has been released and invite the members of the public to, in written format, submit deputations? So, all right, I see. Oh, good. Lots of helpful hands. We'll go over to trustee. Oh, lots. Good. Okay, I'll go to trustee Crawford first. I think he was there first. Go ahead. Sorry, trustee Crawford, I can't hear you.
I forgot to unmute again. Are there any recommendations on tonight's agenda to deal with this?
There was a recommendation that in the agenda to recommend to the board that we pass the balanced budget.
And now we're saying to not do that tonight.
Correct.
In effect. And your deputations would be written deputations, because I'm thinking you can't start allowing, well, I guess there are no deputations in person anymore, but how could we allow for that if we're going to go another week? Correct. How would we physically do that?
Correct. I think that's that we wouldn't want to, and to Acting Director Marsh's point, if we were to allow people to present next week on the 15th, then we still wouldn't be giving their deputations a kind of due process or a chance for us to really reflect on what was presented to us. So that's why I think there was mention of receiving them in written format or email, and giving us, you know, to receive it by, say, the Monday before our meeting, to give us a day or in almost 2 full days to review them prior to making our decision next Wednesday.
Well, I guess if we're going to postpone it until next week, then the recommendation would have to come forward first, and then someone would have to postpone it until next week.
Yes, I believe so. I'm sorry, I just have to go back to my speakers list. Okay, so Trustee Barrett, I did see your hand pop up. Did you lower it, or you're good? Okay. Trustee Edwards?
We're in an education finance, and the process is that we can recommend to the board that we pass the budget. That's not a problem. We have said in our news advertising that we may pass it or may not be to next week. So, and it has not been unusual that we have done that, where we've presented to the board and it goes to the board and we pass at the same time and we still have public deputations. That being said, we can come in writing before the next.
Oh, I think we've
board, so if we can consider it board, which is our next meeting, special board without the public, still that continued public consultation. And again, it would be in writing. I do think that if they're serious about it, it should be in writing, and then we make our decision on the next board.
And I'm sorry, you had kind of frozen a bit during your during what you were saying, Trustee Edwards. So I'm sorry. Could you? I think what you were saying is we don't necessarily. We can, as the Education Finance Committee tonight, recommend to the board to pass the balanced budget for the 2021 school year, but then we would reconvene, give with the opportunity for the public to make public deputations, and then just reconvene for a special public board session next Wednesday versus having to have an education finance meeting and a special board. Is that what I understood you to say?
Yeah, the process is usually we make a recommendation to the board. There's sometimes public deputations at that board as far as at that point in time, because it's to the public. And then usually there's whatever. What I'm saying is that we can make that recommendation, as you said, because that's what we're passing to go to the board. We can do that. What I'm saying is that when we get to the next special board meeting, which is right after, that we not look at passing it, but we ensure that we get say that we're giving additional written feedback prior to us making the decision. And yeah, Monday, whatever, today's Wednesday, having everything in by Monday so that we can have it. But I honestly recognize that we might not get nothing. But I want to ensure that in the process, we have given them time to do public consultation. Not everybody attends finance committee meetings. Not everybody does. It isn't until it actually gets posted as a draft that's when individuals may look at it.
Okay, thank you for that. Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. I'm hoping that this captures what was said, and if I'm wrong, then I'm happy to amend it. But I'd like to move that the Education Finance Committee recommend the passing of the budget as presented to the board. But in light of the limited opportunity for the public to engage in a consultative process, the board extend the opportunity for additional input in writing to be provided no later than July 13th, and that the final budget, and that the budget be considered in the special board meeting of Wednesday, July 15th.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Is there any discussion to that? All right, seeing none. All those in favor? All right, that passes. All right. So I will thank you for that. Is there any other business to discuss tonight? All right. So if needed, we were going to meet next Wednesday. It doesn't sound like the Education Finance Committee will need to meet next Wednesday. So do I have, I just want to make one quick note before adjournment that this stream that the public is watching will continue to broadcast, but we are moving into an in-camera portion of our special board meeting now. So you won't necessarily see people on this stream, but do stay tuned, because when we come back to the public session, we will be popping back onto this stream for the special board meeting. So can I have a motion for adjournment? Okay, Trustee Noble, all in favor? Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Okay.
John, do we need a break, or can we go right into this?
Do we need to go out and come back, or do we just stay here?
No, stay on, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah,
We're
thank
going to
you.
move us over.
Chris, we are now live.
Perfect. Good to go. So move into our special board meeting. Do you have any declarations of interest this evening? Seeing none, could I have someone approve the agenda? Trustee Thatcher, all in favor? Perfect. We'll then move into our item on the, turn it over to Acting Director Marsh.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Have a lengthy report to discuss with the trustees this evening, and so I hope you'll bear with me as we work our way through it. Wanted to make sure that we were being very thorough, though, in our report to you and seeking your feedback and comments as well. So we want to update you on staff work thus far as the planning we have done in response to the ministry's memo that was released on June 19th about the September reopening for the upcoming school year. Staff's report does focus on the ministry direction to create a school day structure. It does not discuss the significant planning that staff is doing in terms of student and staff well-being and mental health and learning. Staff will be updating trustees on that work later in August, but we did want to focus on what the models may look like for September reopening, understanding that this is of utmost interest to our communities and families. The ministry's document on reopening stipulates that in addition to providing families with the option of voluntary school attendance, districts are required to plan for 3 possible scenarios. The first is a normal school day with enhanced public health safety protocols. We're making good progress on this with a cross-section of staff coordinated by our health and safety department, developing a robust operational plan. The second is a modified school day, which with routines altered, including a smaller cohort of students, no more than 15 students per classroom. This is by far the most complex from an operational point of view and will be the main focus of this evening's report to you. However, Superintendent Malia will also briefly update you on the planning for the third option, which is should we be required to go into a distance learning model again for next year. She'll provide more information on that later in August as well, but we will update you with what we have thus far. For the potential adaptive school day, things have shifted since the writing of this report. We've learned from that the Ministry of Education is setting up a working table to further discuss the parameters of what adaptable schedules may look like provincially. I think, however, it is important that that staff share with you some of the thinking we've already done and answer your questions and hear your thoughts in terms of September reopening. The primary considerations in the planning process based on the original ministry communication was health and safety of students and staff, transportation considerations, cohort size, and our responsibility to uphold legal requirements such as the Human Rights Code and collective agreements. When analyzing the range of criteria provided to us, it is important to note that the relationship between them is not always congruent. For example, while limiting the number of adults working with any one cohort of students is the ideal, it is not practical in every context given the operational requirements of lunch breaks, qualifications of staff, and preparation time that needs to be provided to staff as part of the collective agreements. We began the process with seeking feedback from our families, students, and staff. You'll be receiving more information from the surveys in our reopening update in August when we present the detailed plan of what remote learning will look like. For now, however, some key feedback connected to the adapted or full return to school are provided for you in Appendix A. Staff remain dedicated to improving upon the models based on the provincial discussions that will occur, but for now, it is fair to say that we favor an AB alternative model. One of the things that we heard from our parents who responded was that that was a preference for them, and that's why that is the one that we're looking more towards. Of parents who responded, it's also important to note that 60% of them indicated that they are likely or very likely to have their children attend school this fall. That means that for planning purposes, approximately 1/3 of our students may not be in attendance, but will be expecting remote learning opportunities. However, we recognize that this may fluctuate during the course of the year and that for in-school planning and transportation, we'll have to adapt as family needs evolve. Appendix B describes for you 3 cohorts that we anticipate serving in an adapted model. Cohorts A and B that make up students who are attending school but need to be kept separate based on the ministry's requirement of 15 students per cohort. And cohort C who are not attending but engaging through the distance learning model. Students accessing programming with modified curriculum and or alternative curriculum within special education classes of less than 15 will be offered everyday timetabling, and for that reason are not included in the adapted models. However, they too will be impacted by changes we need to make in transportation and length of the school day. Superintendent Mundy, I think perhaps it might be a good time right now for you to share with the trustees some of the considerations and planning that's occurring with transportation, if you could, please.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Brady. DSTS routes over 28,000 students across the region. With the adaptive model, we have a capacity of 24 students plus siblings on a 70-passenger bus. So even with cohorts traveling on alternate days, we are going to require multiple buses for each school site while still working with a potentially reduced workforce of drivers. So DSTS is planning their routes with a 90% retention built into that plan. We also have concerns with anticipated traffic around school sites, which continues to increase and may be more evident in the fall. Therefore, we're going to need to run multiple tiers to accommodate the reduced bus capacity, and that will mean potential changes to school start and end times to allow us to utilize the buses that we have to transport our students. Currently, DSTS is working on cohort planning per route. Then they will begin rerouting the entire system to accommodate these requirements, keeping health and safety of students and operators at the forefront.
Thank you. We've been working very closely with Durham Catholic District School Board because of the shared transportation. We recognize that when we're developing a variety of proposals for reopening, having a common model is in our best interest. Appendix B in your package provides a snapshot of some of those models. One of the major safety considerations is limiting the number of staff that travel from classroom to classroom to provide coverage for prep time and breaks as outlined in the collective agreements and labor laws, and students' more generalized use of the building, for example, accessing lockers and cafeterias. We have developed sample timetables that meet the requirements of the ministry's direction to limit cohort size to 15, offer synchronous learning for the cohort at home, align with the collective agreements, and incorporate the general public health guidance received thus far. And so those timetables are provided for you in Appendix D so that you can visually see what that looks like for each cohort. I think, though, what I'm going to ask is for Superintendents Mundy and Nevels to please walk through the complexity of what those timetables look like, as well as the pros and cons, and want to emphasize that at this point, these are models. These are not ones that we're necessarily adopting, but want to share with you the thinking that is going into the models thus far, as well as pros and cons of them. Superintendent Mundy, I'll ask you to start again, please.
Thank you. The first elementary model includes a Monday, Wednesday, alternate Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, alternate Friday schedule with a compressed day. Coverage teachers, including French, would provide 40 minutes instruction to each class to allow the homeroom teacher to have their 40-minute lunch. This model limits the number of teacher instructional cohorts to 2 per each cohort. There may be some additional educators providing supervision during nutrition breaks, which would occur in the classroom. Students will not stay for lunch, so student gathering, contact with lunchroom supervisors, and concern over supervision coverage minutes would not be a concern. Students would receive opportunities for outdoor physical activity during part of their instructional day. With the reduced instructional day of 60 minutes, real-time learning would be provided to cohort C and the cohort of students at home each day. Teachers would receive their prep at the end of each school day, which would also allow ample opportunity for deep cleaning between cohorts. Cohort tracing would be quite feasible because there would be a consistent cohort and educator contact based on the schedule. Our second model provides a full day with Wednesday as a real-time learning. So students would not attend on Wednesday, looking at having cohort A on Monday, Tuesday, a deep clean on Wednesdays, and cohort B on Thursday, Friday. This model would increase the number of teacher instructional contacts for each cohort as prep coverage would be provided each day. Additional contact for supervision will occur with other staff and lunchroom supervisors during recesses and lunch. There would be potential concerns of students gathering with other class cohorts during recesses and lunch and that unstructured time as well. Supervision may be a concern as schools need to maintain their current supervision minutes and also worry about retention of lunchroom supervisors. Real-time learning would be provided to all cohorts on Wednesday, but would not be provided daily. Coverage teachers, including French, will be able to provide instruction through prep coverage and also real-time learning. Cohort tracing may be difficult due to the number of educator contacts per cohort, but also due to the interaction of students during non-instructional times, including recesses and lunch. So those were the two elementary models that we felt best met our needs as consideration.
I will share with you one secondary model found on page 51 of your package, which was created to align with the elementary cohorting plans and follows a Monday, Wednesday, alternate Fridays, or Tuesday, Thursday, alternate Friday schedule. This compressed day 2-course model has been developed so that each student, no matter their cohort, has a real-time interaction with their classroom teacher daily, whether in school or from home. In this model, students attend school based on their cohort and are engaged in 2 blocks of the same course on their first day at school, and then 2 blocks of their second course on their next day at school. Following the 2 blocks of learning each day, students would be dismissed from school to allow for teachers to engage students in the alternate cohort and those not attending in real-time virtual learning. The benefits of this model include students only interacting with 15 or less students in any given day, limiting the need for lunch hour for students due to large populations and social distancing in secondary schools, and a significantly decreased need for hallway traffic as students would not have to change classes during the day or utilize lockers. The model allows for students to focus on only 2 courses at a time, and in the event we have to move to a completely remote model, it is easier for both students and staff to adapt to this model of learning. Double periods in smaller numbers also allows for students to have more time to grasp complex concepts while providing greater opportunity for differentiation and gap closing. If we choose a 2-course model and are able to return to a regular school day without restrictions, students would continue in this 2-course model, and the quadmester term would continue until the end of the natural semester. The school day timetable would shift, and at that point it would be period 1 for 2 classes in the morning and period 2 for 2 classes in the afternoon. The main challenges with this compressed model is a shortened day for in-school students, which we would have to accept to allow for remote learning of students not in school that day. The chart on the following page outlines what the schedule would look like for a 4-week period. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Neville. So both superintendents have tried to outline, but briefly, when we look at trying to build in online learning, it does mean that it's a shorter day. If we go with the Monday, Wednesday, alternate Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, alternate Friday model, when we lengthen the day, we see that there is more travel and interactions between adults in the building going into the different classes. And we also lose the opportunity for synchronous learning on a daily basis. We know that we've submitted these models to the Ministry of Education, and we know that they, early feedback is that they're not supportive of a notion of a Wednesday online learning day. However, we are still very concerned about the shortened days and the impact that has on families. We anticipate that the working table provincially may shift some of the criteria that we're currently working with, and that the requirement for the models therefore may change based on the provincial tables that we understand will be getting underway shortly. Staff remain dedicated to improving the models based upon the provincial discussions that will occur, but for now it is fair to say that we favor an AB alternate model. The duration of the day, as I said, is a concern. In our discussion with the ministry, we also understand that they're looking at opportunities through those provincial tables to look at how online learning could happen if the day were to lengthen, and it wouldn't necessarily be the classroom teacher providing it. However, in the original document provided to us, that was one of the criteria, was that it was the classroom teacher offering the online opportunity. I think it's important to note that we've been working very closely with Durham Region Health Department, and they too are seeking more information provincially as far as their role and the role of the provincial medical health officials. So we will continue to stay in frequent communication with them. Should we be required to adapt to remote learning, Appendix C, Framework for Real-Time Learning and Flex-Time Learning, identifies some initial considerations for creating a more consistent experience for all students in a remote learning opportunity. And I think I'll turn it over to Superintendent Malia to update you on how this work is progressing, understanding that it's still early days and there will be more for you in August from her.
Good evening. So since distance learning began in March, DDSB educators have been interacting with our students in a variety of ways, as you know. Our survey of teachers and parents reflected the fact that most educators connected with their students in a flex time or asynchronous manner most of the time. Our parents have expressed that they prefer more real-time or synchronous learning for their students, and the Ministry of Education has also been supportive of this parental view. Moving forward in a distance learning or hybrid learning model for the fall, it is essential that we continue to ground our practice in 3 documents: the principles to inform distance learning practice for elementary, the principles to inform distance learning practice for secondary, and the Ministry's Ontario framework for continued learning. Real-time learning or synchronous learning can be defined as opportunities that provide same-time connected interactions between educators and students, as well as peer-to-peer interactions facilitated by the educator. Some examples include Google Meet, teleconference, online chats, and these may include online tools to engage the learners as well, such as Padlets, Google Slides, or Google Docs. Flex time or asynchronous learning can be defined as ongoing, continuous learning that is available at any time. And some examples include learning activities posted on an online platform such as the Google Classroom, D2L Classrooms, or Google Sites. That also includes recorded videos or online resources and applications. Though we do not yet have a true sense of what our schools may be facing, as Director Marsh has mentioned, we do know that real-time learning must increase in frequency and impact for many of our students. The Ministry of Education has identified that come September, it anticipates our model of learning could include distance learning. With that in mind, the district has developed a draft guideline to be implemented by staff with respect to both flex time and real-time learning. We recognize that this circumstance is a challenging one, and we have encouraged educational voice in developing creative and meaningful approaches to assist with student learning. Principals engaged with their staff to elicit feedback on the draft real-time and flex-time learning guidelines. We are currently in the process of analyzing this feedback, but to date, some of the following ideas have emerged. Staff want to ensure that real-time learning plans and strategies are mindful of the need for equitable access for students to technology, hardware, and software platforms. Staff identified the importance of clear and specific expectations for both themselves and students participating in real-time learning. Staff identified the importance and their desire to continue to be offered professional learning in order to further build their capacity with online tools. And finally, but very importantly, staff and student wellness remain at the top of mind when developing all learning models. While we continue to analyze this data and incorporate it into the planning, the following 5 guiding principles will be kept at the forefront of all of our minds. The first is that we will ensure human rights and equity are considered in all aspects of distance learning. We will prioritize relationships and connections with students to support their well-being. We will use flexible approaches to engage students in learning. We will use differentiated, accessible, and flexible learning tasks. And finally, we will adjust assessments and evaluation approaches to support our students and their success. Thank you.
Thank you. In all of this planning, we are cognizant of our responsibility as well to accommodate childcares within our schools. We're waiting on further information from the ministry in terms of childcare operations within the school year. A survey was released yesterday from the Ministry of Education for families to fill out for childcare. And our goal is to share that link with our families so that they may participate in it. We'll provide additional information to you about childcares as information becomes available. A variety of media outlets have reported on the province-wide challenge in ensuring that families have a plan for their children come September so that all working parents can return to employment. It must be noted that access to schooling serves as only a partial solution to the challenge should we go into an adapted model. With cohorts being limited to approximately 15 students in the adaptive scenario, in-school days are limited and shortened. Furthermore, availability of school staff to work full-time within the school setting without a provincial plan for childcare and limited access to childcare and schooling for their own families remains an issue for us. Of those who responded to the staff survey, 35% have reported that they are parents of children under the age of 12 or a child with special education needs. Without a provincial plan to address their needs as parents, the impact upon staff availability to work full-time within a school setting and the number of related potential accommodations that we will receive may also be unpredictable for us. I think it's important to note that if children are not in school, some families will be fortunate enough to be able to access childcare, and that introduces them being part of multiple cohorts, which is the intention of the alternate days and smaller class sizes is attempting to avoid. So it does defeat one of the primary purposes of cohorting that we're being asked to do. CHEO and Sick Kids have released statements that they believe that students need to be in school every day. So staff will continue to work with the province as best as we can, waiting further direction, but wanted to share with you the best of the thinking given the current criteria, understanding that this criteria may change as those provincial working tables get going and start to release more information. Recognize this was a very lengthy report, and so we'll pause there and happy then to open up to questions or your feedback or comments to us. Thank you.
Trustee Forbes, Noble, and Morton.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question, and it just struck my eye. So, and I'm assuming it has to do with enhanced learning opportunities. But I noticed in both the elementary Model 1 and the Model 1 for the secondary as well as Model 2 have so it's A, B, A, B, A, B, and or sorry, A, B, A, B, A, but then the following week has a double up. Oh, sorry, that doesn't apply to. It only applied to week 2 of the secondary model, where we have, instead of just continuing with the alternation, sorry, this is.
No, it's very confusing. And then once we went with one course per day, it became even more confusing. But Superintendent Nevels, I am going to ask you if that's okay, just to walk through that a little bit more explicitly, please.
Yeah, not a problem. So the best way to think of it, the way it worked for me was, if I'm in cohort A, I come to school Monday and Wednesday and every other Friday. And if I'm in cohort B, I would come to school Tuesday and Thursday and every other Friday. So that's why it looks like there's a double up on the B, but over the course of 2 weeks, it equals out to the same number of courses. Does that answer your question, Trustee Forbes?
Right. So it's more to do with the availability, like evening out the simplifying, I guess, rather than just doing a wholesale switch of B comes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the second week, and then flipping and flipping. So it's just a 1 day flip of the day you end up going to school.
That's correct. As best possible, we wanted to keep it consistent for parents so that they know their child would go to school on Mondays and Wednesdays, but also every other Friday. So they really only have to keep track of the other Friday.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Noble, Morton, Barnes, and Lundquist.
I'm looking at the secondary school models, and I just want to confirm that regardless of what model we end up going with, that all high school students are going to still be able to obtain all 40 credits they need to graduate high school. Now, these models will not affect that in any capacity.
For sure. And so when we look at the quadmester, and I should mention, we have created our own little consortium of boards because we felt it was important to, instead of 72 district school boards trying to do this. And our secondary model was a game changer, and I think was adopted by other boards for consideration. So the plan there is that they'll work their way through the first half of the semester with 2 courses, the second half of the semester with their next 2 courses. And the idea of doing 2 was that it gives them a good block of time, and given that they've been out of school, it may provide a bit more flexibility to really understand where the students at in their learning and differentiate a little bit more in a longer block of time. So that was appealing to us, but we were concerned if we went with the summer school model of just 1 course for a quarter of the semester, that engagement and focus and the speed of how fast it was moving might disadvantage some students. But the goal is then that they would obtain the same number of credits as they would normally. And that in this particular model, with looking at the 2 courses, we're hoping it spaces it out a bit more, but provides some of that intensive learning time as well.
Trustee Morton, Barnes, Lundquist, then Forbes again.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy. This is a question for Director Marsh. You mentioned childcare. In many of our elementary schools, those childcare centers share kindergarten rooms. So the before and after is childcare. Those classes will share room, they share playground, and they share toys. Are we giving consideration to how we're going to manage that?
We have raised that as a concern as far as our conversations. We don't have a plan in place yet in terms of what that would look like. We also know that as soon as we go to an early dismissal, for those families who are in aftercare, it's then creating a new pressure for the childcare providers and asking them to provide additional time. So there's the cleaning of the rooms between the cohort. It's the supervising of the students because they come from multiple different classrooms potentially into that childcare space. So there's a variety of factors that we have not yet worked out, but recognize that it is a concern. And I don't know if Acting Associate Director Markowski wants to add any more from the early years perspective in terms of that work.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Really just to add to that, right now we have information, Trustee Morton, that we are looking at cohorts of 10 students in our childcare spaces. We're not exactly sure in terms of how it is that we potentially may be able to utilize additional space in the school that might not be utilized, and looking at sort of ensuring that we're minimizing the amount of contact in each space. But as Director Marsh pointed out, we're waiting for further direction from the ministry in relation to childcare, and when that becomes available, we will update you accordingly.
Thank you both for that.
Trustee Barnes, Lundquist, and Forbes.
Thank you. I just wanted to check. So when we're dealing with the cohort, are we Going back to what we had where it was they're tested, and then it's like every 14 day of testing to see if that cohort is still okay, or are we incorporating cut testing at all?
So
I'm
the
just trying to
ministry,
figure.
yeah, the ministry has not provided us any direction other than a self-assessment tool. And that is actually provided through public health. And it's very similar to the self-assessment tool that we used when personal belongings, for example, were being collected. There has been some talk about testing at different points provincially for staff, but we have not received anything in writing, and that was only through media.
Okay. And the next thing is, I'm assuming there's probably will be a backup plan if there's somebody that tests positive in a cohort, because that cohort would probably no longer be able to come to school. Like,
right. So what we would do is report as soon as we had a suspected case, we would then report it to public health, and they would advise us based on the suspected case what we do. They do then, and that's why we flagged for you in each of the models what the contact tracing is, and then they would respond to us as far as how we need to react. It could be, for example, that we would have a school that would need to go into remote learning for 2 weeks, and that they would assess that the entire school would need to do that. But it would just be that school, and all other schools would be in the adapted model still, or be back to regular model with enhanced health and safety measures. So I think that as it progresses, depending on what happens, public health will tell us, and we don't have any discretion on that. They will direct us as far as what needs to happen from a safety perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Lundquist, Forbes, and Noble.
Thank you, Chair Brady. So I'm struggling a little bit conceptually with this, and I don't think that it's unique to me. It's particularly complicated. So I think parents are going to struggle too. And I think some of the language in the document actually is not helpful in terms of that. It's like $1 million words. And really, I think what I would like to know is, I have one question that I'd like to know about sort of contingency planning. So I recognize that this is all contingency planning in some respects, but it is not a static situation that we're entering. And so what might be working at first may not work weeks later. And I don't mean just necessarily within a school. I mean the whole provincial context or the regional context could change quite dramatically. And so are we doing modeling or some kind of strategy to say, if we have to move from this model where we're in class to something that looks different, are we nimble enough to do that? And I know that that's a challenging question, but it worries me because I think that we don't know what is coming. There are many, many epidemiologists who are suggesting there is a bigger second wave coming than the first wave. And there are a couple that are saying something different, but it just seems to me that in light of that, we may need a third way, essentially, or a fourth way or a fifth way or whatever it is. And I don't know. I know you have enough on your plate. I recognize that we have a broad provincial problem, not just a regional problem, but a provincial one in terms of all of it. But I just need some kind of reassurance. I think that we are recognizing that there's a fluidity to this situation. And in order to protect staff and kids, we may have to do different things, and we're prepared to do those different things as the situation progresses in the fall.
I think we're viewing the 3 different scenarios as the different contingency plans. So if things are going very well and we see a flat line and we get the clear as a jurisdiction that it's returning to regular school with enhanced safety protocols, that's the ideal scenario for us in this circumstance. If that's not, the contingency plan for that then would be the adapted day. And that's the model that is causing us a lot of concern because it's not an ideal one because of the lack of schooling for students. And then the third one, should there be an issue, is then to go fully into remote learning. One of the things that we have recognized, though, and certainly there's a provincial direction as well, is that if we return to a fully remote model, there needs to be a structure to it. And so that's something we're going to have to, one of our principles, of course, is human rights and equity. And we recognize that as soon as we went into distance learning, flexibility was important for so many families as well. And you may recall that we had previously reported that we were really split when we were in that period of time, and we did the survey as far as families really appreciating the flexibility and then families really wanting the structure. Interestingly enough, in the most recent survey, what we're finding is that more families wanted the structure. So as time evolved, which is getting to your point, needs changed. So we'll have to consistently be seeking survey information, but also cognizant of survey fatigue, which we did hear a little bit about from some parents, that they didn't necessarily want us communicating as much as we were communicating. But I think it is important at key intervals to seek feedback from them and then respond. One of the things that we do like about limiting the number of courses at secondary is that it is the most nimble to go into distance learning. And so while we saw it as a negative as far as if we were to return to regular school, that the students couldn't then go back to their 4 courses, we would stick with this model. It is, if you, much more nimble as far as a teacher connecting and focusing on 60 students a day as opposed to 90 in a distance learning environment. And so that was one that was appealing from the perspective of staff. I don't know if that...
If I may, Mr. Chair? That's actually helpful, and I appreciate that I'm not the only person thinking that there needs to be some kind of flexibility. It just, I worry about all of those equity issues that are coming on down the line. But I did want to just comment on something, because you referenced sick kids and cohorting. And I've been very cautious in reading all of these things, because I think they're really important for us to have an understanding of the impact of recommendations on educational initiatives. But I'm actually concerned about the sick kids recommendations, because they almost seem a bit myopic in terms of understanding the realities of families. So not everybody is in a licensed child care center. A huge number of children are in unlicensed child care, in fact, more than are in licensed child care. They're multi-generational families living in homes. There are all kinds of issues that are not actually addressed in the sick kids report and the recommendations. And I think I just want to just sound a bit of a note of caution on this. And I recognize I'm not a doctor and I'm not trying to usurp that, but I do think that sometimes there's an institutional understanding that doesn't reflect all kinds of cultural understandings and the realities of poverty and the like. And I feel like that might be an issue with some of the report in sick kids. But what I really wanted to say is, if you want to look at the failure of cohorting, you look no farther than long-term care and what has happened in long-term care because institutions didn't cohort. And so I understand that sometimes mixing cohorts is an issue, but to me, the greater limitations that you can impose in terms of those bubbles and those structures, the safer our staff and our students are going to be, and their families who are going to be impacted by what they are exposed to. And so I feel compelled to say that although there's a suggestion that putting kids all back in school and pretending everything is pretty okay is the best way to go, I'm not confident that that's true. And I'm not confident of it because of the reality of familial life. And I hope that we are really, really looking at what are our families experiencing? What are their structures like? What are their realities in terms of childcare, in terms of those multi-generational families, and really thinking that through in terms of our planning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to Trustee Forbes and Noble. Just want to remind everyone we still have to go back in camera after, so we'll take these two and hopefully move forward with that.
Yeah,
Trustee Forbes.
Thank you, Chair. Really quick. So we don't anticipate, I mean, I know this is contingency and contingency, so I assume if we end up in a full-blown remote learning model, the ministry, and this isn't even our decision, but the ministry would look towards what would happen to EQAO and the OSSLT, which might be on the minds of graduating students. And how do we test if we are in these, I guess, how do you fit in the OSSLT or any of the EQAOs in the various models?
So thank you, through you, Chair. Trustee Forbes, you raise a really, I think, important point. So the ministry did say that they would not be doing the grade 3 and 6 EQAO assessments, but they did leave OSSLT as a graduation requirement. And you may recall that we also had it canceled last year. And so the plan that they put out is that there would not just be one writing of the OSSLT, but potentially two, offering to two cohorts the OSSLT. So that is a concern for us in this environment. There's no doubt about that. We're also concerned about the graduation requirement of the 40 hours of community service, that is being reintroduced in this initial document, that students will need those 40 hours. And in the update number 1, we did reference that as well. So they remain currently in the plan. And you're right, it is the Ministry of Education that would make that decision as to whether or not they would alter that graduation requirement. It is a concern.
Thank you.
Trustee Noble.
It's just a question in regards to something that was mentioned earlier in regards to Trustee Barnes' question. I'm thinking for if a school were to have a potential case and they would have to go into the 2 weeks of remote learning, I'm assuming that families who have students who attend other schools would also be alerted, but would those other schools also be alerted of a potential connection to someone who's potentially positive for COVID?
So through you, Chair, Trustee Noble, really interesting because we had a few scenarios as we this spring, and they were very explicit as far as how they managed each situation. And so they made the judgment call in terms of risk and exposure and notification. There were times when Acting Associate Director Markowski was prepared to do a communication, and they said, no, not required. So it's very interesting as far as how deeply they go into the history of where that individual has been, and then the tracking methodology. So that's really out of our scope, but we do follow their advice on it.
Thank you.
Or their direction, I should say. It's more than advice.
So this is information then, Acting Director Marsh, do you need anything else from us at all at this point in time?
No, we just wanted to make you aware of the thinking thus far. And I want to acknowledge the staff have spent hundreds of hours examining different models, communicating with different school boards. And I think that if the provincial tables do get established, that's actually welcome news for us, and looking at the criteria that we've been working and potentially altering some of that criteria.
Thank you for the time that's been spent on this for us. Thank you. So at this point in time, we have to head back into in camera, but could I have someone adjourn this meeting right now? Trustee Noble, all in favor? Okay, we'll then adjourn this meeting and go back into our in-camera session.
Sorry. Sorry, Chris.
Yes.
Oh. I was confused by what just happened. And maybe it's the flipping back and forth, but I thought we had other things that we had to cover.
We do.
But I thought we had to do them in the public session.
Sorry, school year calendar.
Yeah, and the recommendation of the, well, what happened in Ed Finance.
So for A, B, C.
Are we looking at the agenda, Chris?
D, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So we skipped to item
Okay.
5, but we have all of 4 still to do.
Well, we need to go back to 3
We need
as
to go
well.
back and,
Okay.
yes,
Okay, I understand that we're still live streaming, so we should be able to continue on with the
Correct.
agenda. Okay. Sorry, thank you for that
you're
clarification.
still live. I see that up there now. So we'll then go on to B. Is everyone on, still on the live stream?
Yeah, we're on 3, report from the committee of the whole in camera. Then we went on to 4 and then 8.
Yes. I think everyone's back on. Okay, so continue with that then. So we'll then go on to our next item.
That's number 3, committee of the whole.
Correct. So who's taking that?
I assume it's me.
Yes.
Okay, so the board approved the actions of the committee of the whole.
But we
in
didn't
camera.
finish, sorry, Nikki, we didn't finish that one.
No,
Didn't
but
finish that meeting.
just to add governance clarification, we did make one decision. So Nikki's correct in being able to have it come to the public board on being able to approve the actions of the committee of the whole in camera, and that would suffice. Sorry,
Okay.
just helping out. Yeah,
Okay, so we did. So that was on a personnel issue, and I will leave it at that. That is my report. There were no declarations of interest. Thank you, Chair Brainy.
Thank you. So our next item, I'm having a hard time pulling up that agenda. If we could just go right into it. Who's next on that? Go ahead.
I think I'll just,
Yes.
I was under A, so I'll just quickly go through it. It's fairly short. We met earlier this evening, the Education Finance Committee. We received a deputation from Tara Cully on behalf of the Special Education Advisory Committee. We did have a motion put forward by Trustee Lundquist that the Education Finance Committee recommend the passing of the budget as recommended to the board. But in the light of limited opportunity for the public to engage in a consultative process, the board extended the opportunity for additional input to be provided no later than July 13th, 2020, and that the budget be considered in a special board meeting on July 15th, 2020. There were none opposed, all were in favor, and that is my report.
We need someone to move that, or that's already been moved. Trustee Lundquist again. All in favor? Okay, great. And opposed. Sorry, everyone. I'm having a hard time getting. What else is left on this agenda? Is there anything else that we have?
A report from Christine Thatcher on the Director's Performance Review Committee is next.
Correct. Thank you.
Ashley. Yes. I'm happy to report information from the Director Performance Performance Review Committee. My report can be found on pages 1 to 6. I'd like to begin by thanking the committee for all of their time and input. The terms of reference of the committee include recommending an annual review policy to govern the process for the annual performance appraisal of the role of Director of Education. The purpose of this report is to provide the board with the committee's proposed policy and to recommend its adoption by the board. So a little background information. The Director of Education is responsible for implementing the elected Board of Trustees multi-year strategic plan and equity and inclusive education policy. Has overall responsibility for staff, operations, and programs at the Durham District School Board. One of the key responsibilities of the Board of Trustees is to monitor and evaluate the performance of the Director of Education in meeting the obligations of the position under the Education Act, the Board's policies and procedures, and the Board's multi-year strategic plan. I would like to add that consideration was given to recommendations from the Herbert report from the ministry. The Board of Trustees is committed to ethical leadership, a healthy workplace culture, and to fostering public confidence in our system. Our recommendation, my motion, the committee recommends that the board adopt the director's performance review policy in the form attached on Appendix A, pages 2 to 6. The proposed policy provides the process by which the board will monitor and evaluate the performance of the Director of Education in meeting the obligations of the position under the Education Act, the board's policies and procedures, and the board's multi-year strategic plan. It also supports the board's commitment to ethical leadership, a healthy workplace culture, transparency, and to fostering public confidence in our system. Again, my motion, the committee recommends that the board adopt the Director's Performance Review Policy in the form attached as Appendix A. Mr. Chair, Chair Brainy, I am pleased to put forward this motion.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Thatcher. Any questions or comments? Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no concern about the policy itself. I would suggest, though, that there needs to be a cleanup of the policy. There's some minor typographical problems, and if we're going to adopt it, then I think that we just need to do a good proofread and edit of it so that it reflects what reflects the appropriate language that we want to use.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, so that's Trustee Crawford. Go ahead.
Well, the committee had asked for some concerns, and one of the ones I had was on the hiring of an external consultant. I thought it should be that it may happen, it might be a requirement rather than it will be a requirement, because we don't know what the costs are for that. So maybe someone could answer the question about whether it'll be may or will, and if it is will, what the cost might be.
Yes, I'll start with the first part of that, and Trustee Barrett, I think, can talk to costs and so on. You may remember, Trustee Crawford, the Herbert report to Minister Hunter that was dated April 2017. It was a report from the to the York Region District School Board, and it was something that we were very concerned to follow those recommendations that were made. I won't go into a lot of detail, but the most salient points for us was the fact that the committee were troubled by the board's apparent failure to assess the performance of their director through a meaningful and transparent process. Further in the report, was recommended that an independent 360 assessment must be an essential component of the director's performance appraisal. The board should retain the services of an external human resource management professional to assist in the appraisal process. So I know I did provide you with a lot of reference material reading for you to do in your spare time. But this was something that we consider to be extremely important in terms of our DPA policy.
Trustee Lundquist.
Sorry, my video is out. I hope you can still hear me.
I can hear you.
Would you mind very much all, Trustee Crawford had two parts to his question, and I've only answered one part. So I was, do you mind if Trustee Barrett responds to the other portion concerning cost?
That's fine.
Thanks. And just to reiterate, it's very deliberately written as we will have an external consultant. So it's not a may. What's going to happen is that the hiring of that external consultant is going to come back to the board, but it's not a may. It wasn't the recommendation of the committee to be able to have, we may have one. It's we have to have one. And the costs will be determined upon the scope of what the realm or what the parameters of what we want that individual to be able to do as well. I can't give you an idea on costs. I know what it costs for myself in my own job, but any of those costs will come back to the board, and the board will have the authority to say yay or nay based upon the parameters of the proposal plus the costs that come forward as well. So that's it's not a may. It's a part of the process that we set as a committee that we absolutely wanted based upon the elements that Christine had talked about. And that's enough.
If I may, Chair, just supplementary, if that's the way that it's going to work, is that the cost of it will come back to the board and it'll be a board decision, then I am satisfied with that.
Yes, Chair Crawford, our next meeting is on the 21st. And that is one of the items on the agenda to come forward at that time. You may recall that we are going to be charting information for you and providing you with some cost, some numbers as well. So that's coming up. It's something that will be on the agenda for the 21st of July.
All right, then. Thank you. I'm satisfied with that.
Thank you. I have Trustee Lundquist next.
Sorry, I'm a little bit, I'd like to just ask a question about 4.1.1. And I'm going to pull it up because I think I just need clarity. I'm not sure why the director needs to work with an external consultant on this every year. That seems like a little bit of overkill to me in terms of what's outlined in 4.11. So it could take months to work that through, and then 6 months later you have to start again. And I mean, maybe that's the intention, and if that's the intention, so be it. I'm just a little puzzled about that. And then the other thing that naturally arises out of this is, oh no, you know what, never mind. The second part of my question, I'm going to recant that because I actually figured it out as I thought about it earlier today, and I forgot that I had figured that out. But if this is standard in terms of every year a director does this with an external consultant, then so be it. It seems to me like a lot.
Wants to answer
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. I think both Michael and I can respond to that. You may remember the chart that was created where we took a really careful, in-depth look at the policy for the two boards that recommended through the OPSPA document, the new OPSPA document. And we did take a look at what each of those boards were doing in terms of their director performance policy and how often they were involved in the 360 process. We then went on to determine what we felt was suitable for us at this time. We decided that we would have that 360 on a yearly basis, if you may recall that. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
If I could, Mr. Chair. Just, Nikki, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you that it would be seen as excessive. It is, however, a strong recommendation in both the Peel report, the York report, and the Toronto report from the Ministry of Education. So that is why we adopted that. in business, we wouldn't necessarily always use an outside consultant. I have a 360 every year, but we might use it. But it's already been recommended in 3 of the reports. We thought that it would be prudent on our part to make sure that we still fit within that framework before it became a mandated framework. So
that's helpful. Yeah. So thank you both. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Is your hand still up, Michael, or are we going to Trustee Morgan?
What I was going to do is there was a motion. I was going to second the motion. The only thing that I would add to that is to Nikki's point is that the grammar perhaps, or some of the typos would have to be fixed. I don't believe it's going to change the intent of the document. But with that proviso, I would second that motion to be able to adopt the work with cleaning it up. And we'll frame that from that perspective. So,
okay, Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy. I just want to acknowledge all of the work that Trustee Hatcher and Barrett have done in creating this document. They've done a lot of research, and I fully appreciate and support the document. Thank you.
So we have a mover and a seconder. Any other speakers to that? That being said, and actually, I just want to thank you, Trustee Noble, for resending the agenda to me. I must have deleted it, switching back and forth. So we have multiple times this evening with some things we've been dealing with. But so could we have a show of hands, all in favor of that motion? Is anybody opposed? Seeing none, that carries. So thank you. We then move on to the report of the Integrity Commissioner Hiring Committee, and I'll turn that over to Trustee Templeton.
Trustee Templeton isn't here, so I am going to provide the report on his behalf as he requested me to do so, if that's fine with you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely.
Basically, we had last reported at the previous board, basically the direction of hiring an integrity commissioner through an RFP process. Trustees brought up concerns, particularly around fit and how we would evaluate fit with for candidates coming forward. So we revised, looked at all the concerns and revised the document. If you look at section phase 3, there's 2 phases in particular. We've assigned some points to around the presentation of the bidder, a demonstration of ensuring that they understand, and that's through their answering of their questions, through an understanding of our mission and our values and our standards, and giving their experience as well. And these are through, again, will be through interview processes with the candidates. In the RFP, we have specifically said that we would, if a company does apply, they would still have to appoint an individual as a contact who would be really considered our integrity commissioner. And those would be the people that we would be part of that interview process. So we are basically coming back with the recommendation that the board authorizes the committee to proceed through as outlined in the document in the process, and that a report will come back to the board and the recommendation to the board in accordance with section 2.1 of bylaw 12.
So you're moving that then, Trustee Edwards, on behalf of the committee?
Yes.
Okay. We have a seconder. Is there anybody that could second that?
Sorry, I do.
Trustee Forbes. Any speakers to that? Okay, seeing none, we can then move forward. Everybody in favor of that recommendation from the committee? Anybody opposed? Okay, seeing none, that carries. We then move on to the school year calendar. Associate Director Markowski. Do you need something else, Donna? Is that something you're?
No, just that there was one opposed, and that was Trustee Barrett.
Okay, I didn't see that. So, okay. All right. Move forward to school year calendar.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy, the report can be found on page 11 of your package this evening. The purpose of the report is to seek approval for the revised 2020-2021 school year calendars. I just want to start off and provide some context. On June 30th, the Ministry of Education provided new guidance and timelines for 2020-2021 school year calendar submissions. And within the memo, the ministry outlined that it was prepared to approve any modified calendars that would start prior to September 1st, provided that the calendars meet the requirements of Regulation 304 for school year calendars and are also able to plan for a range of delivery scenarios for school reopening and implement based on public health advice. In order to maximize instruction for time for students, the memo also encouraged school boards to start their school year by September 1st. And boards were advised to schedule 3 PA days prior to start of student instruction. Further direction will be provided regarding the focus of the PA days so that training is provided to educators to prepare for school reopening. And this Friday, July 10th, 2020 was the revised timeline to submit updated calendars. In response, we've updated all 4 calendars, elementary and secondary, modified and regular, to reflect a start of the school year by September 1st, I should say, sorry. All 4 calendars include 3 PA days prior to Labor Day, as was encouraged by the ministry, and are all in compliance with Regulation 304. I do want to highlight the information that is captured within the report to respond to student instruction needs prior to September 8th, 2020. Both elementary and secondary modified school year calendars where student instruction commences prior to the start of the regular school year. Student instruction will be through distance learning, as is our current online model, to align with the Ministry of Education's approach to opening schools for the 2020-21 school year. Beginning September 8th, 2020, school on modified calendars. So that's our 2 elementary schools and our 3 secondary schools will follow the same student instruction model as schools on the regular calendar. This approach allows the board to meet the unique needs of the students and families within the modified school year calendar. We're recommending that the board approve the 4 revised school year calendars and for this information to be forwarded to the ministry by this Friday, July 10th, so that we are in compliance. Thank you, and that is my report this evening.
Thank you, Associate Director Markowski. Do you need anybody to move anything or just strictly information at this point?
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy, we would need approval for all 4 of the revised calendars and then approval to submit this upcoming Friday.
Okay, any questions or comments from trustees before we go for that? Seeing none, could we have somebody move that? Trustee Morton and a seconder. Trustee Edwards, would you like to second that?
Therese Barnes had her
She had her hand up. Okay. So Trustee Barnes second. All in favor? And are there any opposed that I'm not seeing here? See none, so that carries. Okay, thank you. Then move on to, is there anything else anybody else wants to add to the agenda? Okay, seeing nothing. We then go on to adjournment. Can I have someone move adjournment? Trustee Barrett, and thank you. And Trustee Morton, I see you on the screen. You second that? Good, all in favor? Thank you. We'll then move into our in-camera session again. So everyone stay on line. Thank you.